Welcome to this episode of Antinatalism Around the World. So today we're in Finland, actually, you guys are in Finland. I'm not in Finland, but I have been to Finland once, which maybe I'll go off on an irrelevant tangent later in the episode. But anyway, so I'm joined by Matti and Weera, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves how they want to. Yeah, if you both sort of give a bit of an introduction as to who you are, just share what you're comfortable with, and also how did you sort of become an antinatalist, find out about the term, all of that sort of stuff. Should we go with Matti first, and then Weera, you can go after?
Thank you, Lawrence, for having me here. I don't know anything about Finnish antinatal scene, but I will tell a lot about myself. And to your question, I can tell you why and when I became an antinatalist philosopher. I'm not sure that I even know what being an antinatalist in other senses means, but being an antinatalist philosopher is nicely an institutional thing. If the antinatalist community and the philosophical community both agree that I'm an antinatalist philosopher, then who am I to say otherwise? Now, I became an antinatalist philosopher gradually, and because of my voluntary childlessness. My first wife and I considered having children at about the time Louise Brown, the first test tube baby in the world, was born in the United Kingdom. And inspired by this scientific progress, we decided to have twins, a girl and a boy. We'd put them in little rucksacks and carried them around at the university, and we'd be known as that cute couple with those cute twins. Susan and Peter were the intended names, so they already had named them as well. So as it happens, reproductive science wasn't advanced enough to grant our wish at the time. Disappointed, we of course decided that this child thing is sour grapes anyway, and we didn't want to have anything to do with it anymore. And the human mind cements these things pretty quickly, it seemed, because I just noticed that already less than a year later, I wrote a song about the horrors of family life. The song was called The Suburb, and it told about me in my 30s, old man, in other words, as a business executive, cheating on my wife, two disturbed children, beginning to realize that life has no meaning whatsoever. That's quite remarkable. The writer of the song being a 20-year-old army officer with a shining career ahead of him. Well, anyway, when that army officer then escaped the military and started studying philosophy, as you do, the voluntary childlessness remained. So vasectomy was legal in Finland only when you turned 30. So there were quite a few years left for the partner to be on the pill and us both having to worry about contraceptive failures every month. No wonder then that my MA thesis in philosophy was on the morality of abortion. So I defended, of course, the view that abortion should be performed at the woman's request, no questions asked, just psychological counseling or support in case it's needed. And I say, of course, not because this is inevitably the correct view, but because it was the view that defended my practical position already carved in stone. So looking back, I was just putting together the philosophical justification for my own view that there is no duty to have children. That there is no duty to have children is quite sufficient for a voluntarily childless person. Everyone's reproductive autonomy is respected and all is well. But I was beginning to see cases in which that wasn't enough. Reproductive autonomy seems to be saying that people are still permitted to have children, in fact, whenever they want, and regardless of the kind of life that children would have. And that didn't seem to me to be right. A particular case that struck me was children born infected with HIV. In the early days, an HIV-infected woman would, with a 50% probability, also infect a newborn baby during delivery. And since was no medication, the lives of those children were very short and full of agony. In 1995, I spoke against this in an academic presentation titled "Is it intolerable that children are born with HIV?" And my answer was yes, it is. My colleagues were scandalized, though. The presentation was published, but I had to change the word intolerable into undesirable to get it past the editors. Apparently, having children could never be intolerable. Go figure. Now, I had 30 years ago upgraded my views from mere reproductive autonomy to a proto-sentiocentric negative utilitarian antinatalism. For years, I had believed that, that it's all right not to have children. And now I was convinced too that it's wrong to have children who suffer. Now, looking at the timeline, mid 1990s here, I could have resorted to a shortcut. David Benatar's Why It Is Better Never to Come Into Existence was about to be published, and I had seen it before publication. The manuscript was sailing around in my circles at the time. I could have taken from him the idea that all children, all future people will suffer, and my antinatalism, as far as humans go, would have been complete. But I didn't really buy the idea, and in its most decisive form, I still don't. Pollyannaism aside, many people do believe that their lives are good, and their minds just cannot be changed. I don't think naysaying them is a tenable solution here. So I huffed and puffed for a while until I found the answer. Not all lives are bad, but they don't need to be. It's enough that they can be bad. When people reproduce, they don't know for sure what their children's lives will be like. They are gambling on their offspring's destinies. So 20 years ago now, I said this in two academic articles, and my antinatalism was complete, without David Benatar's belief-defying theory of value. Since the articles were published in 2004, I was not officially an antinatalist philosopher yet. It took another 2 years for David Benatar and Théophile Desiraux to come up with the term in the first place. Then it took a decade before David Wasserman recognized me as the formulator of the risk argument, and then it took almost another decade before Amanda Sukenik asked me to the Exploring Antinatalism podcast, informing me that, ta-da, I am a notable antinatalist philosopher, which I hadn't known. And then you and the Cosmic Antinatalist and Karima Kerma and David Benatar and Théophile Desiraux and David Pearson, Les Unite and Patricia McCormack and many others also recognized me. And then Ian Mendham published an acidic reaction video on my work and how terrible it is. So I was made. So for better and for worse, here I stand.
So you finally, after all those years, received that badge of honor right at the end.
Yes.
Cool. So, Weera, I know that's a bit of a beast to follow up on, but give a bit about like who you are, anything you want to give, and sort of how did you come across the idea of antinatalism?
Yeah, that is. I haven't prepared quite as well as Matti has. So, yeah, this is also, I haven't had the time because I'm only 24 years old. I haven't really had a whole career to kind of ponder about these kinds of things yet. So excuse me for that. Well, I have always been child free. I know that. I have always kind of just thought that it's not for me, and many of my friends have been very interested in like kids and their subject in general, and admiring at them all tiny baby shoes and being like, oh, that's so cute. And I have never really felt much when talking
Mm.
about those subjects, of course, being like, oh yeah, that's nice, and but not really ever ever gotten it for real. And also, as a feminist, it has been a bit of a tough subject, like children, because it feels like that path has really been pushed on me. Like,
Mm.
I became an aunt a few years back, and when I held the baby for the first time, and all of my family just looked at me like, "Oh, well, do you want
Yeah.
one yet?" So it hasn't been such a charming journey, but so I always had a choice not to have kids, but I did have to care and hype with for other people's behalf. Like, you weren't like allowed to just not care about it so much. Like,
Mm.
I do love my nephew and he means the world to me, but kids as a subject was never just too much of an interest. And how I became an antinatalist was only in 2020, and my now fiance brought this up for me. Like he had seen it in Reddit, and we had only been together for like about a month at that point. And he brought it up.
That's quite a bomb to drop.
Yeah, but very necessary to talk about, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I was a bit like, I was fine with it because I didn't want kids. So
Mm,
I was like, okay, well, that's a weird thing. Like, it never kind of, I never thought about that having kids could be actually immoral. It was almost like an unsettling idea because literally everyone's parents have done it and
mm,
many people want to do it. So it was, I was sitting at home for many days after that being like, how can this be wrong? I tried to prove it wrong because it was such a weird thing to hear. And well, I after days of pondering, I came to the conclusion that I actually am one and that there is only solid arguments for this. And
mm,
even though I had the fear of being frozen out or that people might not like it, I still decided to like be a part of this because it was that one piece of order in this very chaotic world and something that I could like really rely on and be like, okay, yeah, like this makes sense actually for once. So
mm.
that's how I got to be an antinatalist.
Nice. No, thank you for sharing that. And also, I want to say congratulations on the engagement.
Oh, thank
Um,
you.
and also, it's funny to hear about how your fiance found about antinatalism. It sounds like Reddit is the source of many twists and turns for couples around the world.
Oh yeah.
Um, but yeah. Anyway, so thanks both for sharing a bit about yourselves. So I next wanted to go on to like Finland in general and like how what is it like discussing antinatalism in Finnish culture? Because there will be some cultures that are extremely religious, and even mentioning or even questioning like the ethics of reproduction is just a big no. You'd be socially ostracized. But somewhere like the UK here, you'd be seen as a bit weird in some places. It would be seen as quite bizarre in other places, but like it's something that you can kind of mention and talk about fairly openly. So, where does antinatalism sort of fit in how controversial it is in Finnish culture?
Well, in Finland, we have this culture of silence. We really don't bring stuff up. It's that people just don't want you to be difficult. So if you bring up something like this, you're being difficult and you are
Mm,
being maybe a bit shamed and belittled. Like, why are you talking about this now? Like, this is not going to change anything. And discussion about difficult topics is fairly public only when there is alcohol naturally involved. Uh, or then when people get to be anonymous, which is online. Um,
yeah.
and then people get ad hominem attacking on the person itself and not their argument. So it's really not very healthy. And people feel threatened and annoyed if flaws get pointed out. So all kinds of conversation gets cut short pretty fast here.
Mm, mm. Yeah, it's maybe someone needs to set up a little group in Finland where it's like you talk about antinatalism, but you also have to down 5 pints before you do it, and then you can have a normal conversation about it. Um, Matti, do you have anything you want to add about Finnish culture and antinatalism?
Yeah, Weera's description is very good, and my own experiences are other ancient or quite recent, which doesn't stop me from telling you them. Back in the day, my MA thesis on abortion was published, and there was some controversy, the usual threats on my life and what have you. Now, more recently, a few weeks ago, I was interviewed by Helsingin Sanomat, Helsinki News, the biggest newspaper in Finland, distribution 500,000, on my antinatalism and related views. And of course, "Why don't you kill yourself?" appeared immediately in the commentaries of that article. There was a nationalist news outlet who saw the story as a sign of rampant cultural Marxism in Helsinki news. And some lovely person on Twitter X opined that with a face like that, the childlessness must have been involuntary to begin with. So, so business as usual, a flashback to last millennium for me. But a couple of further observations though. Now, this might have been a particularly bad micro time to talk anything about reducing the number of children, because the conservative nationalist government is trying to find ways to keep the number of people of Finnish descendants up and the number of people with other descendancies down. And this is so not a time to suggest that Finns should not reproduce. And the newspaper was apparently so frightened of its own boldness that the feature, which was pre-published in the online version, never made it to the print version. They just didn't dare. So instead, Helsinki News ran at least half a dozen stories within days, emphasizing the national need to make more babies, followed just last week by an editorial lamenting again that people are declining, there's a declining tendency to have children. But so, as I said, this was perhaps simply bad luck and unfortunate micro timing. Give or take a few months, and the reception could have been different. And I'm saying this because antinatalism is not entirely frightening to some fractions of the Finnish society. Feminists can see at least reproductive autonomy, maybe more as a welcome development. The voluntarily childless, they are, whatever their reasons, but they can be amenable. And perhaps surprisingly, not all religious people object too loudly if the message is right. Now, sex and the pleasures of the sin, pleasures of the flesh are, after all, sinful, and abstaining from them cannot be all bad. So, in a recent podcast with some voluntarily childless association people, I used that as a bait, and it seemed to be moderately attractive. The what would Jesus do? He didn't have children, so there you go. Anyway, so and even the Helsinki News after my feature was ambivalent in that on the comics page, two separate cartoonists presented ideas that were clearly compatible with at least some kind of antinatalism. So that's my take on the matter.
Mm. And I remember when we were sort of talking back and forth before we actually did this recording, we were organizing this. Where are you? No, I can't remember which of you sent it to me. The post on, I'm going to get the name wrong, but Valvi?
Vauva, that was Matti.
Va- va-
Mm.
Okay. Okay. So like that so that was a post on like what I think is a sort of fairly popular Finnish social media platform or forum or something like that. So what is like and where you were saying that, you know, people enjoy the anonymity and it makes them a bit more open to talking. Is antinatalism discussed like to any extent on social media or online openly?
Well, I tried to actually, when we were talking about this specific talk online, I went to look and I found maximum 5 different discussions, which were all really
Okay.
old or really short. And people really just, they don't like this subject for some reason at
Mm,
all. I mean, any difficult subject is quite little discussed, but antinatalism especially seems to be somehow, I don't know if people don't know about it yet or why aren't we talking about this, but there was
mm,
not much at all.
yeah.
Yes,
And
Lawrence, the post that I sent you was about someone having found antinatalism somehow and identifying themselves as such, and then others piping in and telling why and how it's right or wrong to be something that they don't know anything about. So the usual online thing. The title Vauva.fi means baby.Finland, and all manner of things are discussed there.
oh,
So you can find a baby cot in there, and you can find an
oh.
antinatalist there, and so on and so forth.
So is it a bit like, have you heard of Mumsnet? That's like an
Eat,
American. I think. Yeah,
eat
yeah,
something like that. Yeah.
yeah. I think Mumsnet's American. Maybe it's English. I don't know, but yeah. I actually had another quick question, which I actually just thought of now, and I hadn't sent you ahead of time. So if neither of you have an answer for this, it's fine. But my understanding from the outside, and I might just be completely ignorant, is that I've sort of heard from some people I've spoken to that there's a sense in Finland, particularly recently, that you sort of live in the shadow of Russia. And obviously, given with Russia's sort of activity in Ukraine and the potential for expanding elsewhere, is there any discussion in Finland about sort of like this is even if they're not anti-natalist, this is not a good time to have children because the looming threat of Russia, or is that not really anything that's not been discussed?
I mean, I do have a feeling that it is on people's minds, even though it's not an active like
Mm,
thing that people are talking about right now. But I mean, it must be in the back of people's heads
mm,
that there is that threat. I mean, it has to be right.
mm.
It's a
Yeah.
bit of a shameful thing to think about not having children because of all this government talk about too few Finns working for the pensions of us and blah 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 and so on
Mm,
and so forth. So people are maybe a little bit cautious about telling, and there's no no actual need to say anything. You just don't have children, and then you just
mm.
drift on, and nobody's the wiser. You don't have to go around saying I'm an antinatalist for that.
Yeah, no, no, of course. I just it was just interesting because I have a couple of friends who have had children in over the past couple of years, and I know that even those friends, some of them are sort of um, starting to think about like actually was that the best move, with the way that the world's going and the sort of uptick in conflicts recently, obviously one of them including Russia, which is why I brought it up. So I just thought it was interesting, like even in my experience, those I know that have chosen to reproduce, we're in a situation where even they are sort of thinking about whether it was ultimately the right thing to do or not. So yeah, I don't know. I just thought it was interesting in the Finnish context as well. Um, anyway, so um, the next question I wanted to ask about is like antinatalist figures in Finland. So this is sort of like anyone who is either well known for being an antinatalist or someone who's just like relatively well known and also happens to be an antinatalist, either alive today or from the past. Obviously, I know Matti is one of them. So what we'll do is we'll hold off on you, Matti, because I've got some specific questions for you in a minute. Um, but apart from Matti, do either of you aware of any sort of like Finnish figures who are anti-natalist as well? Or?
I know myself, and I can tell stories about myself, but I I really don't know about others.
Mm,
I mean, let's talk about me then. So, because I'm not sure how to answer the question, other Finnish antinatalist, known Finnish antinatalist, and my answer to your question is that Finland could have had me all along, but we didn't meet until quite recently because I haven't always been, although I may have been an antinatalist, I have not always been an antinatalist in Finland. I mean, in fact, I may be appearing in the wrong episode of your Around the World show, Lawrence, here, because I worked in England since 2001 to
yeah.
2013, and I do remember conversations about antinatalism, my antinatalism mainly, Matti is weirdo, in Chinatown, in Manchester, in Soho, in London,
Yeah.
Riverside, in Newcastle, and many other places. And colleagues were appalled, but also amused by my views. And these were friends and they are friends. But anyway, I was in England at that time, so Finland could have had me all along, but
Mm,
we only met quite recently. And I checked the list of my academic conference presentations, and that confirms what I've said. My first one was called "Selecting Our Offspring: Is There an Ethical Problem?" And this is a paper presented at the first International Conference on Philosophical Ethics in Reproductive Medicine, Leeds, England, on the 21st of April, 1988. Also presented at the 18th and also presented at the 18th World Congress of Philosophy in Brighton, England, on the 24th of August 1988. Then abortion and applied ethics in Oxford, England. Then fast forward, and then I'm presenting the intolerable paper that I mentioned in Prague, Czech Republic, in 1995. Then and this is now the interesting thing. It doesn't tell you about Finland, but it tells you about what Finland missed, because then at the 7th of March of 2003, my archives show me I am giving a presentation called "If You Must Make Babies, Then At Least Make the Best Babies You Can." And this is an invited paper presented at the British Fertility Society in London. So, in 2003, and this is one of my two risk argument papers, the less known, but it contains the gift box analogy that we just discussed online, Lawrence, after some of your thing. So anyway, the point here being that I don't know any antinatalist figures in Finland. I could have been, but I wasn't recognized or I wasn't here. And you have at some point mentioned Joona Räsänen, who has written on antinatalism with me as well as by himself, but he's not a committed believer. He writes about these things. And on the other hand, this is how things are in the periphery of things. I mean, Finland doesn't recognize the international antinatalist philosophy that they have among themselves, because Finnish people are like that. No one is a prophet in their own land. Maybe now that I've made a career in England and I'm back here preaching the message, then perhaps Finns will listen to me or not. I don't.
Well, and kicking up a stink in the what was it called? The Helsinki News, the Helsinki Post.
The Helsinki what?
What was the newspaper called? The Helsinki
News.
Helsinki News. Yeah. Cool. Well, I think it is worth just briefly mentioning. Is it pronounced Joona or Joona?
Oh, Joona.
Joona. Okay, I was getting the name that wrong. So, I think it's worth just mentioning a bit more Joona, the guys whose name I got incredibly wrong. So, yeah, Matti, can you give a bit of an outline? And if you can't, then I can give a bit of an outline on what he's spoken about to do with antinatalism, even if he isn't an antinatalist himself.
He published an article in Theoretical Medicine and Bioethics arguing that antinatalists must be vegans or vegans must be antinatalists or something like that. And somebody has just written against him, and it is in an issue that I guessed edited, so it's my responsibility, sort of. But he may be making the normal thing that people are making, using positive utilitarianism instead of negative utilitarianism, which means that people can come back and say there is a difference between antinatalism and veganism because the animals really suffer, whereas people don't really suffer, or not all of them. So this was one of his things. So, but it's international work. He doesn't talk about it in Finland. And then the other thing that broke a little bit into Finnish news media was with me in the journal Bioethics, where we seem to argue that, well, the title of the paper is something like "Antinatalism Solving Everything Everywhere All at Once," which is sort of an extinctionist red button wet dream that if you stop reproducing, then there will be no sufferers and that's suffering gone. And I know, well, again, it's more of an international thing. There have been conservative
Mm.
international newslets that have said that we are nihilists and idiots and godless rogues.
um, cool. So, Weera, do you have anything to add to that? Is there anyone that comes to your mind as any sort of like figure or notable person in Finland?
I mean, when it comes to antinatalism, I really only know myself, my fiance, Matti, and then a few people who know the word
Mm.
antinatalism. There
Yeah,
really isn't much people
yeah, yeah,
knowing
yeah,
about
yeah.
the thing in here, I think. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, it's like that with some countries. In some countries, you have loads of people. Like in the UK, we've got lists and lists of people, and then in other countries, there's just no one. It's just, I don't know, different cultures, or it's just chance, or whatever. Um, I actually realized I skipped a question, which is asking you guys what your experience has been like talking about antinatalism. Now, Matti, I obviously know you've already spoken a bit about, your experience in the academic world, but this question is more about your sort of like personal interactions in terms of like friends, family, stuff like that. So, Weera, do you want to go first on this one about, what have your experiences been like talking to friends and family about antinatalism? And I think it's only been relatively recently that you've actually started to do that, right? So, how's it been?
Yeah, it was very scary and difficult to begin with, but of course, it's very different to talk to your friends and family because there is like that true caring and a true want to understand, which is not there when you
Mm,
talk with strangers. And many people were like interested and even agreed on some points that I was like telling them like why do I believe in this and what are like the main frames, like what is even antinatalism. And like, for example, people really like the point that I made that it's a very green thing to do, like it's like not
right, right.
overspending resources and whatnot, like making another person. So that was something that many people have like nodded their head to and being like, yeah, that's true.
Mm,
And of course, one has to be very careful not hurting anyone's feelings, like not attacking or shaming. But like my antinatalism comes from a place of love and compassion. So
mm,
compassion. So it is has been quite easy to talk about it when like um, my goal is to live my truth and be myself and not to change minds per se. So it's a
mm,
bit like just a personal choice, like being a vegan, for example, can be like that, a personal choice
mm,
that doesn't have to affect the people near me. So I get to keep my personal relationships as they were, but I get to be a bit
mm,
more free on how I behave around people. I don't have to be careful that will I accidentally say something and make people mad, for example.
mm.
So it has been
Yeah,
quite
no,
free.
yeah, no, no. To be honest, I'm glad to hear it because, well, I actually wanted to ask, like, what was it that made you start talking to people about it? Because from the sounds of it, there was a long time where you didn't talk about it, right? You just kept it to yourself. So what was that change?
It took me 3 years, and the reason that I didn't talk about it for 3 years was that I was afraid that I'll lose people, like my
Mm,
friends and family. Like they're super important to me, and now I'm also an aunt, so
mm,
I was very afraid that something might happen and I might lose these people. That what if
yeah.
they disagree with me so much that they they like get angry at me or whatever. But I forgot that my friends and family are awesome people.
Mm.
I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's like an important thing as well to emphasize, especially for other people, especially because, there will be people watching this from all over the world in different cultural contexts and stuff in different situations, is that, you know, antinatalism is one of those things like, many other issues that people can be very passionate about. And so they, you know, they want to talk about it and almost sometimes feel like a duty to talk about it. either because they feel it's so important or because other antinatalists are telling them to do that. But I think it's also important to emphasize that, like, you know, whilst obviously it's important to, as you said, kind of like live your truth and also speak truthfully and share who you really are and what you believe, it's also important to have like healthy relationships with friends and family and stuff. And so no one should ever feel like they have to, cross that bridge with their friends and family. Obviously it's much better if you can be completely open with your friends and family, and I'm glad that you've decided to do that and it's been successful. But yeah, there are ways to talk about antinatalism and even to try and change the world as an antinatalist that in ways where you don't have to try and negotiate the personal relationships that you have with your friends and family, because I know that can be very difficult for some people. But I've heard of some bad stories and some good stories from people talking to their family and friends about this, and I'm glad that like you're another positive story that I can add to the ones that I've heard.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really nice to hear.
Yeah, I haven't quite talked to everyone about it yet,
Yeah.
so I mean, so far so good.
Yeah, 100%. Matti, what's your more personal experience like? So forget the academics for a minute, if that is even conceivable to do. What's like your more personal like interactions been with antinatalism? Have they been successful or not so much?
They are interconnected because I do this for a living. So my
Okay.
views on abortion and then on antinatalism have been out there in the open from the very beginning. So I haven't been someone for free abortion before I had said it publicly almost. So, and the antinatalism grew from there. So family members have, I'm sure, had opinions about my choices, but I solved that preemptively by closing all contact with my immediate family for the decisive decades of my life. So I was 2 decades uh, totally incommunicado with my parents, for instance.
Mm.
As for antinatalism, I think the reaction is mostly, oh well, Matti is like that. I mean, here's an example for you. I was recently having dinner with a friend since who knows when, and I started a sentence saying, "Now that I have apparently become an antinatalist," and he interrupted me laughing and said, "Matti, you have always been an antinatalist." So, so those are my things. I haven't discussed matters with my parents because I don't like them that much, and I know that would have been a really
Mm.
difficult conversation
Yeah.
with everybody else. Everybody else I'm infesting with my views, publicly and privately.
Um, cool. Yeah. No. Thank you both for sharing those, because I know those are more sort of like personal experience stories. I wanted to now like zoom back out to Finland generally and talk a bit more about like the politics, laws, or any movements in Finland that are relevant to antinatalism or procreation. So to start us off, I think when we were talking before, Weera, you mentioned something about the requirements for sterilization are quite harsh. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Do you want to go on about that?
Yeah. Well, there's not so many rules, but they are quite rigid about them. So you must be 30, or you must have three or more kids. Like
Oh, so
otherwise, you can get
so the
denied.
the
Yeah.
rule about yeah, sorry. So the rule about being 30 years old is still in place,
Oh yeah, that hasn't changed anywhere
right?
yet.
Okay, right. Okay.
And there's also, when I was Googling about this subject just earlier today, just to fact check myself,
Hmm.
there was also on these web pages where you could like book these things. They encouraged people to save some just in case, like sperms and eggs, to
Yeah,
kind of mitigate the possible like damage being done. Like they really don't trust people to decide for
yeah.
themselves about this yet,
It was really
and it's
really
quite
a surprise.
expensive. So
It was really a surprise to me when I checked on that when I when I said about my vasectomy and the rules back then, and I was really surprised to find that all that is still in force, so that you
Mm.
have to be 30 or have 3 children already, and then you need a permission of the National Supervisory Authority for Welfare and Health, which is sort of adding insult to injury, having the government deciding about your fertility. But of course, we have
Mm.
that with our abortion law still, and so on and so forth. So governments are really interested in our fertility.
Yeah. And they're particularly interested in men's balls,
Yes,
by the sounds
absolutely.
of it, or
Yeah.
men under 30s balls.
Yes.
So you mentioned abortion. I can't remember which of you mentioned this beforehand, but one of you mentioned that the abortion laws have just been updated for the first time since the 70s. What's the deal with that?
Yeah, it was. The abortion law has gone somewhat like this. I have written it down because I couldn't remember, but like up until 50s, you could only get an abortion if it would have resulted in death or serious illness. And then we
Hmm.
had a second try in the 50s where they included also rape and incest. Like then you could legally abort it, but so many people died from the complications that were due the illegal abortions, so they changed them in the 70s then for the better, which was pretty much what we have now, but it was quite infantilizing towards women, and they wouldn't trust our own evaluation skills about whether or not we should or could have a child. So in 2023, that law got changed finally after the 70s, so it was there for quite some while.
Right. And
So
do you
now
know
it's
what the
from
yeah.
request up until week 12, I
Right,
think.
right, right, right. And that was the
Yeah.
change in 2023.
Yeah, that latest one.
Right. Okay. Cool. Matti, do you have anything to add on politics and laws and stuff?
Well, the abortion law of 1970 can be called awful now. At the time, it was a great improvement because, well, thinking about my situation and my then partner's situation, we were living in Helsinki, educated people who could justify their choices uh, fluently. So anytime we'd had a pregnancy, we'd just go to the gynecologist and explain the situation. Then we'd know the right vocabulary. We'd say that it isn't suitable, fit for our life situation now, and blah 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 blah, and then we'd have the physician or two physicians to sign the papers. So it was. I didn't even know this when I wrote my master's thesis. I thought that it was stricter than that. Why else would I have got myself involved in any of that explosiveness? But anyways, I got involved in it, and now I know about these things. So the actual insulting thing that has sort of been uh, it's more linear now was the two physicians that are needed. And the two physicians that you don't find in the rural conservative area, you can find them in Helsinki, but you don't find them in when you are 15 and frightened
Mm.
and live in a religious community and all the doctors are against abortion and all that. So it was really the inequality of it was the injustice of it was really a really bad thing. Now I believe that we just had the law slightly amended so that I'm not sure that we have those have two doctors anymore. I think that we have only one physician. It's still an insult on women's reproductive autonomy, but it's getting slightly better. It is
Mm.
getting worse if you want to think about it like that in other ways, because in these interim years, in these 50 years, the moral majority, the religious people, have been gnawing at the fundamentals of the law, changing the time limits so that what was the 28th week was then the 26th week, and then 24th week of pregnancy for some really serious cases, and so on and so forth. So they've been doing a clever job from their point of view. and that didn't go anywhere. So I don't know. It's getting better and it's getting worse, but
Mm.
it's Finland.
Yeah. And so I've got some questions for you, Matti, about a couple of the things you've done over the years and recently. But before we get on to that, that I wanted to ask about, um, uh, how has antinatalism been discussed in the media? So on radio, newspaper, TV, stuff like that. Now, obviously, Matti, you've already mentioned, some newspaper articles that either have been done about you or reacted to that. But have there been any other discussions around antinatalism that haven't been mentioned yet in the media? Any podcasts that have been done, or news reports, or TV shows, or anything like that? Weera, are you aware of any?
I mean, at least none come to mind right now. At least anything that would be
Mm.
directly tied to it. We have more discussion when it comes to child freeness and not so
Yeah,
much about antinatalism.
yeah. Matti, do you
Antinatalism is a Antinatalism is a weird word, and it just pops up sometimes. I mean, when I was googling up this antinatalism in Finnish, I found something from 2015 in a local newspaper somewhere in the east of Finland, where there was either an editorial or a letter to the editor. I couldn't tell, which was saying that God will punish all those who are antinatalists. Then antinatalism was not explained, but antinatalists are not in God's favor. That they knew quite firmly, and so on and so
yeah,
forth. So it's really sporadic. It's a chuck
yeah.
here and then you get something, but you don't get a sense that these people even know what they are talking about.
Mm-mm. Yeah, well, if you still have the link to that, it would be great if you could. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through all of this, get all the links that I need to include, put in the description and stuff like that. So, hopefully, anything that any of us have mentioned throughout the episode, we'll be able to get a link to, and people can find them in the description. Um, but yeah, so I want to ask a quick couple of questions, Matti, about. So I'm going to ask about your rock operas. Then also, you were at a recent theatre production on the topic of extinction, I think, and then also your Omelas lecture you gave. Um, so the first is about your rock operas. So are you able to just give like a brief intro into what actually are those operas, and also what is like has antinatalism been represented in those? If so, how has it?
Yes, well, I have written and produced two rock operas, Playing God and Orchid. And the first one, Playing God, premiered in Basel, Switzerland 10 years ago, and that one went on to be performed on stage in Helsinki, in New Haven, Connecticut, and then off Broadway in New York at the Cape Playhouse.
Oh,
Uh,
right.
yeah, well, it is probably based on an academic book of mine called Rationality and the Genetic Challenge, Making People Better, question mark, which is about making people better by gene technologies and cloning and all that jazz. Now, in that opera, in a small town called Happyville, of course, everybody is in a pro-natalist frenzy and wants to use all the new methods and gadgets to get the healthiest, most handsome, most intelligent babies that they possibly can. And I played the part of Mr. Cunningham, who is a science peddler who sells people all these services. Now, it would have been quite possible to read this as a critique of pronatalism, but my collaborators didn't see it quite that way, and it ended up being something of a celebration of family and community values. So, well, oh well, at least the science peddler played by me gets struck down by a lightning by the Norse god Thor from the Terrors of the Gods in the end of the show. So gods don't like the competition in the field of reproduction. People are not praying anymore because now they have science. So well, anyway, I get killed. The second one, and that's what I think operas are all about: singing high and then getting killed. The second one, Orchid, has an explicitly antinatalist story, although I didn't realize this fully when I was writing and producing it. The antinatalism or not of both of these rock operas became clear to me only last year when Amanda Sukenik and I made the podcast episodes Hankikanto 2 and Hankikanto 3. Hankikanto is the t-shirt I'm wearing in here, Tadam, our show's thingy, and that was in the Exploring Antinatalism podcast channel. Anyway, Orchid tells the story of two scientists from a faraway civilization called Bellatrix, who study, they are from the star Bellatrix out there, who study reproductive behavior on Earth. And one of them, called Tiame, creates a species called the elves. And these are lascivious folk. They are trying to reproduce with anything that moves. And then the other species, Orchid, or the other scientist, Orchid, creates a species called the Orcs, or the Orchid people. And they don't procreate at all, but that causes them all kinds of trouble. And the overarching theme is how Orchid can stifle the biological urge to reproduce. And in a key area, she sings, "Give me darkness, give me silence within." And the opera ends with everybody singing together, "Here comes the dark, here comes the dark, here comes the dark is here." So a happy ending in that sense. The dark will descend and everything will be gone. Now that after Amanda's interview, I'm more fully aware of the antinatalist nature of that work, my plan is to grow that into a trilogy. By the species that were created, the elves and the orcs, you may have noticed that Orchid retells the story of the Lord of the Rings. And,
I did think that.
and of course, the second part of the trilogy, which is called J and I, will retell the stories of the Old Testament and the New Testament. And
Right.
in the third part called Lucifer Nanda, that will probably tell about an antinatalist philosopher meeting an antinatalist activist and then finding the hidden big red button and pressing it. So it's early days yet, but in this wholesome all family show.
Can I quickly ask on that? So you said you were wanting to develop these two further ones. So do you? And I know this is like early days, but do you have a vague like timeline for that? And do you know, will they be shown in Helsinki and stuff, and people will be able to go there and see them? And
It's impossible to tell. I'm still working at the university, and that unfortunately takes some of my time. So I cannot be doing rock operas and antinatalism all the time. But the idea of the rock opera trilogy is about 10 years old, and it may take another 10 years for me to get there, but I will get there. As for the performances, Playing God was a special case because we had somebody who had played at Woodstock in our production team, and he had all the connections. So and he had a fan club in the United States. So we got some connections through that, and of course there were university connections because it was nicer, because it was telling just about genetic challenges and people overcoming them, despite my character being evil, and so on and so forth. So that was a special case. Orchid was only performed twice. It costs a bit. I mean, it's a good-sized family car every time you put up a performance like
yeah,
that. And if you are not absolutely made of money, then you are not going to perform them that many
yeah.
times.
And
But I'll
and
try.
was Orchid was only shown in Helsinki, or where was it shown?
Only in Helsinki. Two
Oh,
consecutive nights in Helsinki.
right. Okay. Cool. Um, and then you recently have done two things. So the other one is also theatre related, and that was someone else put on a stage production, and the topic was extinction, right? And then you joined a panel discussion afterwards. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, well, Turku City Theatre ran a few performances of a puppet show kind of thing with the name Extinction Paradise. It is a story of a marine biologist who loves life in all its forms but refuses to procreate herself. And uh, I was in the panel in there. It is more of a war cry for women's right to decide for themselves than ethical antinatalism in any sense, as far as I could see.
Mm.
But there was the panel where we discussed some of the ideas. Does Weera know anything about this performance in Turku City Theatre? Extinction Paradise? No, no,
No,
okay.
unfortunately, no. I missed it.
No, no, no. It's just the very rare things in Finland where antinatalism
Mm.
comes even close.
Yeah. No, that was interesting. So it sounds like you picked up on the vibe of it not being entirely antinatalist. So did you talk about antinatalism there yourself, and did they have a reaction, or did you just sort of go with the flow of what was happening there already?
Oh, I always tell them everything. I tell them about antinatalism and my own choices and how they should make the same choice. And if they have children, they are evil people. And I'm always on the search for the big red button and all that. I cannot help myself. When I get started, then it never stops. I don't know
And
about the reaction.
yeah, and by the sounds of how antinatalism is discussed in Finland, I assume that you had consumed about 8 or 9 pints of alcohol before that point.
Yeah,
um,
well,
and then you also gave a lecture recently. I think this was the most recent thing that you've sort of done in public, was an Omelas lecture at a university. What was that like?
yes, for the last couple of years, I've been doing stuff on antinatalism so actively that it was a matter of time when it would spill into my Finnish academic existence. So out of the blue, probably just needing filler for the program, the host of the von Wright and Wittgenstein research seminar at the University of Helsinki, which is my alma mater, asked me if I could join them and give a presentation. And here, by the way, we have another connection with England again. George Henrik von Wright and Ludwig Wittgenstein were consecutive philosophy professors at Cambridge University before Wittgenstein died, and von Wright moved back to Finland to educate people like me when he was already retired at that point. And just to add a detail, 20 years ago, their professorship, that very same professorship, was vacant, and I applied for it, and I got shortlisted but not selected. Close but no
Mm.
cigar that time. Uh, anyways, back to Finland. And a few weeks ago, I accepted the invitation to present at the seminar, but I said that the only thing that occupies my mind these days is antinatalism. That I've just published a book with a co-author Amanda Sukenik on antinatalism, extinction, and the end of procreative self-corruption. So I'd be happy to present some of its content. It has 3 parts: history, theory, and morality. Take your pick, I said to the host. And what happened next was what I have expected. The invitation was tentatively withdrawn.
Oh.
This antinatalism thing didn't immediately strike a chord with me, said the host, putting his words very, very carefully. Could you consider some other topic? And I said, no, not really. And I just let the matter drop and walked out. But I was already exploring some connections that my antinatalism has with the philosophies of von Wright and Wittgenstein, the seminar's named philosophers. And so I informed a couple of weeks later the host of the seminar of my tentative title for the now cancelled presentation, which would have been On Becoming an Antinatalist by Misreading Moore, Wittgenstein, and von Wright. And he took the bait. And with apologies, I was reinstated. And I then presented a presentation with Amanda on our Omelas version of the risk argument, and gave it to a sensational crowd of 10. I have never seen more than 6 people in that seminar's audience. And they listened politely and then asked a lot of questions that I didn't understand, which happens to in most academic occasions. We listen to each other, others chatter, then we share our own views, thoughts on anything that we chance to think about during the lecture. Now, I learned one lesson though about antinatalism. A part of our argument in the book is that Western philosophy is a string of responses to antinatalism. And my idea has been that this shows the silliness of philosophy, that poets point out that life has no meaning, and then philosophers climb to their ivory towers and invent stories to contradict them. So charlatans, idiots, I say. But the host told me after my presentation that he had first thought that our claim, Amanda and my claim, is silly, that philosophers are just responders to antinatalist challenges, that that's ridiculous. But then he had realized that this makes philosophy important and worthwhile, but it could really be the thin blue line between humanity and the meaningless abyss of reality. So Western philosophy in his eyes now turned into a success story exactly because it has kept people going in that illusion, despite the knowledge that life has no genuine cosmic meaning, that the illusion is good. Philosophers upkeep the illusion, philosophers are good. I had no good answer to that, and I still don't. I mean, if collective institutional self-deception is the best we can do, then what on earth are we doing here? But I don't know that one.
Cool. No, thank you for going over all of those because I know there was sort of like a spate of new things that had happened. So it's good to get updates on those. And also, what I'll do is maybe if there are any like pictures or anything from any of those, I'll include them in the actual video. So if there are any, then people would have already seen them by this point. But anyway, yeah, no, thank you for going over that, Matti. So before we finish, one thing that I did want to do, which hopefully Weera is okay with me doing, but if you're not, then I can remove this, is I wanted to give you some recognition because I don't know how many people watching will know this, but you translated the Antinatalist Handbook into Finnish, which is obviously
Yeah,
another thing. Yeah, which is obviously another thing that's relevant to antinatalism in Finland. So yeah, I just wanted, if you're happy for me to leave this in, then I wanted people to know that because
of
it's another
course.
thing that
It would be actually really nice.
you
Thank
can
you.
add that to your CV next time you apply for a job and then get rejected for the job.
Yeah, I think you'll get jobs with that in your resume. Resume. Yeah.
um, but yes, so before we end, I wanted to ask if either of you have anything coming up involving antinatalism that you wanted to let people know about, any sort of like future projects you wanted to work on, or anything that you're already working on that is in the pipeline already. Obviously, Matti, you've already mentioned that in a very long pipeline, you're working on the two further operas, but we don't know how long that pipeline is going to be. But yeah, Weera, I wanted to come to you first. Is there anything that like you are working on at the moment, or you want to work on in the future to do with antinatalism, or are you just focusing on maybe talking to those last few remaining friends and family members about it first, or what are your thoughts for the future?
Yeah, well, for now, I'll just focus on my near circle and to open up about this subject to people. Currently, I'm not translating anything. I actually I do have an open translation going on about the podcast episode that Matti and Amanda made like a year ago, but I actually honestly just forgot about it. I'm intending to get back to it. So probably something to do with translation because that seems to be
Yeah.
where I have settled in this area now. So
Mm.
I guess that's what I will be doing.
Cool. Nice.
Yeah.
And Matti, is there anything else you're working on for the future apart from the two rock operas?
Well, on my to-do list, I think that I have two or three titles for academic articles on antinatalism, many other things as well, but three on antinatalism, I believe.
Mm.
Then I keep following the cosmic antinatalist and your channels, and every time you say something that irritates me, I will prepare a little reaction video saying that what you are saying is rubbish, so that you can then say that what I'm saying is rubbish, and
And so the
then of
cycle
course
continues.
then then, of course, in the middle of August, we'll have the great definition panel on the Exploring Antinatalism podcast channel with you, Lawrence. And the background for our viewers here is that the English English language dictionary definition for antinatalism has been missing, but the Cambridge Dictionary added one a few months ago, and now we are organizing, Amanda and Lawrence is there as well, and we are organizing a great panel where a great antinatalist tell you once and for all what antinatalism should be and how it should be defined.
Yes, so people have got that to look forward to, and obviously it's relevant to antinatalism in Finland because you will be making an appearance. Cool. I think that's everything. What I'll do is if you want people to be able to reach out to you and stuff like that, I'll ask you after we've stopped for any contact details, and I'll put them in the description below. If you want people to be able to contact you, if not, that's completely fine. But yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining. Very quickly, is there anything that we haven't covered in any of the questions so far that you wanted to mention about antinatalism in Finland, either of you?
I don't think so. This was pretty well covered now, I think.
Okay, nice. Matti, you got anything?
No, thank you.
Okay, nice one. All right, well, it just leaves me to say thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. This is in no way to offend you, Matti, but I very much appreciate Weera coming on because this is, I think, your first time doing anything like this. Matti, obviously, you've been round the block on these things many a time, so to you, it's second nature now. But yeah, I wanted to thank you both for coming on anyway, because I think people will be really interested in what antinatalism is like in Finland. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on and doing this with me.
Thank you.
Right, thank you.